Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Monday, May 20th, 2013, start of a brand new week of insanity, brand new week of Triplegate. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Now, in our third hour today, Cindy Sheehan is scheduled to be our on-air guest. We're having some difficulty connecting with her. As you're probably aware, she's in the middle of her Tour de Peace bike ride across the United States. She started out in Santa Monica. She's following the old traditional route of Route 66. And she's about halfway through this thing, and so she's not always able to get to phones and email, and so we don't actually have, at this time, a place to reach her for hour number 3, but she may call in. It may be a reschedule, but you know, we're hoping to connect with her sometime very, very soon. And, of course, a week from today, Richard Mack will be returning to our show to talk about the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers of America's 2013 convention, where these peace officers across the nation are standing up for our constitutional rights, our freedoms, and they basically need your help to do this, because all the big money is on the side of the fascist money junkie tyranny. Now, getting into the news, as I mentioned, Triplegate is still rocking and rolling. New revelations are coming out. And if you'll remember, back when this started and we were seeing all of this whining and crying coming from the Democrats about, oh, the GOP will just destroy themselves, you know, pursuing this scandal mongering and nobody really cares. Well, the poll numbers are in, and the vast, overwhelming majority of the American people are saying they want full, complete investigations. What happened in Benghazi, why the IRS is targeting basically Obama's enemies list, or as I like to call it, the special high interest targets list. And of course, the Department of Justice's targeting of the media. And we ran our own poll at whatreallyhappened.com, and it came in basically with 95% in favor of full investigation, full disclosure, find out what's really going on here. We cannot let go of this wonderful opportunity to really lay bare the dark underbelly, or as my wife likes to call it, the bowels of power in Washington, D.C. And what we have is a situation where 100 million angry Americans just became sharks, and Obama is bleeding in the water right now. And it's not been made any better. As you're probably already aware, last week that video surfaced from about a year ago of Obama joking about sicking the IRS on his enemies, and it was a joke, but it betrayed a certain mindset. Now we have this quote that resurfaced from 2010, and this is the quote: "We're going to punish our enemies, and we're going to reward our friends who stand with us on issues that are important to us, Barack Obama." So back in 2010, this was not a joke. He said he was going to punish enemies who opposed him on his issues. And that is not the job of the President of the United States of America. The job of the President of the United States of America, the chief executive, is to execute the will of the Congress. And Congress's job is to represent the people of the United States of America. Obama does not own that FBI. Obama does not own that Department of Justice. Those are taxpayer-funded assets to serve the taxpayers, not oppress them. Now, we're already starting to see complete thrash mode in the propaganda coming out of the Obama administration. We have this story that's been quoted all over the place where the White House aides are saying, well, it doesn't really matter where Obama was the night of the Benghazi raid. It's kind of irrelevant. You don't need to know where he was, which is a very absurd statement. And when we come back from these commercials, I will explain why. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And over the weekend, we started seeing this very weird kind of spin coming out from the White House that Obama's whereabouts the night of the Benghazi attack is, quote, a largely irrelevant fact, end quote. Well, that's going to get your scratching your head on that one, because if we assume, and we know what assume means, the official story is true, well, then it admittedly doesn't really matter where Obama was as this was all going down. So this is clearly an attempt to de-link him from Benghazi as early as possible. And that tells us they're afraid of where further investigations are going to go. Obama is in his second term. He can't run for office again. And if he was AWOL during the attack or someplace, it almost doesn't really matter. It's a moot point. But if my theory about Benghazi is true, and according to a report from the Washington Times, retired four-star Admiral James Lyons is thinking along the same lines, and Benghazi was this staged October surprise hoax to help Obama win re-election, then where Obama was during that attack becomes of paramount importance because it could lead to impeachment. So with the White House acting like they have something to hide, more and more I am convinced that Benghazi was, in fact, a false flag staged incident. Oh, the evil Al-Qaeda is going to kidnap the ambassador, and then they wait a few days, let this build up, and Obama goes in and resolves the situation. He becomes a hero, proving he's not a new Jimmy Carter. It doesn't turn into a new Iranian hostage crisis, and he rides the tide of public approval into his second term. Now, the number of groups and individuals targeted by the Internal Revenue Service continues to grow. Apparently, even the Humane Society was getting harassed. It's just blowing completely out of proportion. Anybody who was not completely in line with Obama's agenda was being harassed. He sees them as enemies. We're in Richard Nixon territory here. Nixon had his enemies list. Obama's got his special high interest targets list. And they're being pounded on. Now, over the weekend, this was reported in Investment Watch blog, there has been an anonymous leak from an IRS official saying that all these decisions, everything came from the very top. This story that it was a couple of rogue IRS people somewhere down in Cincinnati. Remember, as a class, politicians are not people who stand up and accept responsibility for what they do. They'll take credit for anything good that happens, and they'll point fingers and shift the blame for the bad stuff onto other people. When going along further the same lines, that there is a culture of intimidation throughout the entire Obama administration. Obama is ruling even his own people in a climate of fear. Now, of course, we remember last week, just a week ago today, Obama was out there saying that he only learned of the IRS harassment of various groups the preceding Friday on the news, the same way that we, the American people, learned of it. But we're getting more and more confirmation. This is over from Newsmax. The Obama administration knew of this IRS malfeasance, knew of the IG's investigation back during the 2012 campaign, last year, June. Senior Treasury officials were made aware that this had been going on. Tea Party groups, other groups being harassed by the Internal Revenue Service. And so the Obama administration did know it. And we're back to that Nixonian question, what did the president know and when did he know it? Because Obama right now is coasting along on this ludicrous idea that his own staffers knew this was going on and didn't bother to tell him. And it gets even better. This is a story breaking over at 12160, where apparently going out to, actually this started at U.S. News and World Report. Let's give them the proper credit. They went in and they looked at the White House visitors' logs, which are public records. And they found that the day before the Internal Revenue Service started targeting the Tea Party and other activists, the president met with the IRS union chief. The IRS workers have their own union, and the chief of that union was a guest at the White House and met with the president. The very next day, the IRS launched its targeting of the Tea Party and various other groups. This is in the IG report as well. So we're getting awfully close to a smoking gun. It's not really a smoking gun, but it's definitely a gun whose barrel is a little bit warm. Now, I want to make a point here right now. If you are a political activist or a politically active group, now is the time for you to file for your 501c4 status, because the IRS won't dare refuse you now in this current climate. So if you're a Tea Party or any affiliated organizations and you want to apply for a tax-exempt status, now is the time to do it. Because any of these 501c4s that get delayed will simply be fodder for the fire. I was thinking about starting a foundation myself, and now's the perfect time to go ahead and do it. If I'd done it before, like everybody else, it would have been delay, 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 harass, 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 harass. Now is the time to go for it. Question is being asked, is there any limit to the scope where the IRS can go? They are a law unto themselves. They are the face of the American tyranny. We're seeing this article out of moneynews.com. The IRS is able to see everything you do online without warrants. Complete violation of the Fourth Amendment. The IRS, remember, is not a law enforcement organization. They're not an anti-terror organization. They're simply there to grab the money. And they are scanning and data mining and surfing every bit of your online communication, looking for evidence that you may have more money than they, the IRS, think you should have. And it's a huge data grab and a huge surveillance by this private corporation. Because remember, the Internal Revenue Service is a private corporation, like its master, the Federal Reserve System. It's a private bank and a private collection agency that are openly violating civil protections, the right to privacy. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the so-called fair tax or sales tax, because as this latest IRS scandal is blowing up, the people pushing the fair tax or the national sales tax are basically saying it's time to end the IRS. And they're right, it is. But what's really interesting is when you go out and you look at these arguments put forward by the fair tax people or the national sales tax people, they never talk about getting rid of the Federal Reserve. In fact, the reason I'm making an issue about this is over the weekend I got into a very spirited debate online at another website with somebody who was out there saying, yes, it's time for the fair tax. And I said, it's not going to change anything unless you get rid of the Federal Reserve. And they came back and, oh, no, absolutely. We don't need to deal with the Federal Reserve. Yes, it's bad, but really, let's just swap the income tax for the fair tax and all will be well. And that, of course, is complete nonsense. And the metaphor I used for this was Blackbeard the pirate. Now, Blackbeard the pirate changed his crew on a regular basis, especially after he violated his royal pardon. And he just went out and he got a new crew. And getting rid of the IRS and trading it for fair tax or a national sales tax is like telling Blackbeard he's got to replace his crew, but leaving Blackbeard in place. Nothing will really change. He'll just get another crew of scurvy cutthroats and go on plundering and plundering and plundering. And until you get rid of Blackbeard himself, the situation will not change. Now, there's another agenda behind this push for a sales tax and a fair tax. We know the income tax is illegal. It's a violation of the United States Constitution. The Internal Revenue Service likes to claim that the 16th Amendment overturned Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, but it didn't. First of all, nobody can prove the 16th Amendment was actually ratified. And even if it had been, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Stanton versus Baltic Mining that the 16th Amendment, in fact, conferred no new taxing authority on the government. And so this push to impose the fair tax or national sales tax is an attempt to swap an illegal tax scheme for a legal one before the American people rise up and say, why should we be paying any of these taxes? And if they succeed in imposing the fair tax or the national sales tax, then the government can say, well, in hindsight, there may have been deficiencies in the 16th Amendment, but that's history now, really. There's nothing to be done. No remedy is possible, and now you have to pay your legal tax. It is not the IRS in and of itself. It is the predations of the Federal Reserve System itself. And you should be very, very angry because the face of the American tyranny is that Infernal Revenue Service, a private collection agency for a private central bank, none of which are legal under the Constitution of the United States of America. Going to take another break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I hate to say I told you so. Actually, I rather enjoy it. But back when this story first broke of the Department of Justice targeting the Associated Press in this wide-ranging scan of all of their phone records, which included the phone records of private rooms inside the U.S. Capitol building, I said back then, I guarantee you, it was other places besides Associated Press, and today we are learning that the Department of Justice was also targeting Fox News. And so it is growing. The scandal continues to grow, and this is actually a good thing because now the corporate media is angry. The corporate media now finds themselves on the same side as the independent media. We're all viewed as enemies of the state. Is the government targeting the independent media for surveillance? Of course they are. There's no way they're not going to be doing it. We're much less obedient and subservient than the corporate media is. Meanwhile, speaking of the corporate media, we were talking about over at television station KMOV and their anchorman Larry Connors, who went public on social media that he had been targeted by the IRS following an interview he did with Obama that was very critical of these very expensive taxpayer-funded vacations the family is continually taking. Well, management at KMOV have now, they pulled him off the air, and now they're saying they've ordered Larry Connors to not do any more posts on Facebook, to not give any interviews regarding this controversy. They're basically silencing him. Now, obviously, they don't dare fire him because then at that point all the shackles are broken and Larry can go out and talk to anybody he wants to. And we're going to, in that case, we'll try and get him here on this show. But we're starting to see this repression that basically represents a prior restraint by corporate management. And it's one thing to tell a TV news anchor what he may or may not say on your TV network. But this goes beyond that to telling Larry who he can talk to and who he can't talk to in his own private life. And that is a violation of the First Amendment. It's one of the reasons why I am glad I no longer work for any large media operations. Not that I ever kept my mouth shut when I did. And the same is true for Republic Broadcasting. We can say what needs to be said because we are not financially obligated to large corporate structures or shadowy non-governmental organizations. This, of course, is a reminder that right now Republic Broadcasting is in the middle of a fundraising drive. They need your help. The only way we're going to get the big money corruption out of our society is for the little money to stand up and unite together in the common cause of restoring the Republic. And now is the time you need to do it. The Obama administration is weak. It's fractured. There's a huge gaping hole in the wall of their fortress. There's actually 3 gaping holes in their fortress wall. Benghazi, IRS, DOJ. Now is the time to mount a public awareness offensive against what these criminals have been doing to this nation here. Now, the Department of Justice has formally charged a journalist in a leaked case. And what's really significant about this, okay, is they actually, it involves State Department advisor Stephen Kim, who told Fox News chief Washington correspondent James Rosen that U.S. intelligence believed North Korea would respond to additional UN sanctions with more nuclear tests, which Rosen then reported. Now, none of this was classified information. What they're on these guys' case for is simply talking to each other. That's how paranoid the administration is. They want to scare their own people away from talking to the media, and they want to scare the media from approaching anybody in the government to ask them questions. That's a prime function of what the media is supposed to do, whether it's corporate or independent. the traditional role of the media is to report on government wrongdoing, and here we had an indication that the United States was using these UN sanctions to provoke a response in North Korea that would justify an invasion. And they're trying to charge these guys with espionage for reporting the facts that were going on, and none of this was classified, none of this was unauthorized access. They're basically trying to stand around and make a case that all of this surveillance on the corporate media was justified. See, we got one. He talked to the wrong people. We've got one. This won't even go to trial. It's so absurd. And as I mentioned before, the good news about all this surveillance on AP, Fox News now, and probably all of the others, and probably all of the independent media, is it has now enraged the corporate media. And all of a sudden, they're on our side of these issues. The Washington Post put out an article on Lois Lerner and the IRS. They did their own fact-checking. Wow, what a refreshing change. And they just came out and blistered the official story. They awarded it 4 Pinocchios, which I think is where their scale tops out here. And so the media is now being very critical of the official story. That's a good thing. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about how this blanket surveillance of the corporate media, AP, now Fox, probably all of the others, has provoked extreme rage and anger within that corporate media, because for decades the corporate media has gone along with the official agenda, going all the way back, certainly within my experience, back to the Vince Foster case, when I first found those FBI records that proved they were fraudulently manufacturing Lisa Foster's identification of the gun found with her husband's body. And I back then, I was still buddy-buddy with all the networks. And I went over to the network news affiliates. They were anchor stations in Los Angeles, and I showed the people that, and they said, we can't touch this. It's the end of our career if we touch that. And after these decades and decades of the official story, oh, the economy's getting better, Arabs are bad, Israel is good, and, Arabs did 9/11, all the other lies that we've been told, Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. How does the government repay that loyalty they have been demanding from the corporate media? By treating that corporate media just like it treats every other American, as a potential enemy of the state. And the backlash is growing. Back in 2006, when they did this to ABC, it worked. It scared them down into going back to just staying in the little cubicle and quoting the government handouts as the news. Completely different reaction now. Piers Morgan, who has been absolutely towing the line on the government's gun grabber agenda and was ridiculing anybody who dared suggest that people need to be armed against possible government tyranny, now even he is saying he sees it now. So he's changing his tune. All of the gun grabbers are now coming up and saying, yeah, this thing about the IRS does justify why the Founding Fathers put that Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights to stop government tyranny. This thing is just backflashing on them horribly. And we're back to that same kind of Nixonian idea that whatever the White House may have said yesterday, you should not pay attention to that if you're a loyal American. They're re-scripting on a day-to-day basis. Now, you've got the CEO of Associated Press saying that what the government did to Associated Press and their reporters was so broad and so secret, it is an unconstitutional act, and he is absolutely right. He then goes on to say it has a chilling effect on news gathering and press freedom, and he's absolutely right about that. James Goodall came out there saying Obama is worse for press freedom than Nixon. And if the press is not free, whether it's corporate or independent, if the press is not free, there is no freedom. Because you are surrounded by an illusion of lies to control you. I think one of the reasons the Matrix movies were so popular is people recognize the metaphor that was being made within those films, that we live inside a very sophisticated, crafted illusion of what reality is supposed to be, and it simply is not true. And that illusion exists purely to turn human beings into a source of labor and wealth. So the official story is crumbling. A lot of people are out there saying now's the time to stand up. Chris Hedges had an article earlier. We linked it to whatreallyhappened.com. Stand up or die. Now, I do not support violence at all. But if there was ever a time for nonviolent, peaceful demonstration and non-cooperation, it is now. The federal government as a whole has these gaping holes in their fortifications through which we, the masses, can pour through. Their walls have been breached. They breached them themselves with Benghazi Gate, IRS Gate, DOJ Gate. The Tea Party is planning a national protest, coast to coast. Please join in, or find any other group that is having a protest and get involved. Get a sign, get out there, be visible. We know how terrified the government is of these demonstrations. They were targeting the Occupy movement. They were infiltrating the Occupy movement. They were trying to disrupt and smear the Occupy movement. They did exactly the same thing to the Tea Party. The government loves to play dirty, and there's nothing new about that. If you go back and you read the history of COINTELPRO and how they went after the anti-Vietnam movement, how they went after the early feminists, how they went after the Native Americans, how they went after the civil rights movement, they love to play dirty. They think it's their divine right to play dirty. You, the American people, are expected to be honest, fair, ethical, and that gives the government power over you because they are willing to lie, cheat, steal, and kill to attain their ends, and they think it makes them superior human beings, and it doesn't. It just makes them human beings willing to lie, cheat, steal, and kill. So now's the time to get out there. Now's the time to be visible, even if it is just within your circle of fellow employees, your friends, your classmates. It's time to stand up and say, this has gone on long enough. And again, this is a call for you to go out and financially support those entities who are trying to get the truth out to the American people, because now the American people are asking questions. Triplegate has got Americans breaking loose from their torpor, their media-induced haze and hallucination, their trance-like state. They're waking up. They've all swallowed the red pill, and they're standing up and saying, what the heck has been going on in this country? And you all need to help us get the message out there. You need to lead all these people in to Republic Broadcasting, to whatreallyhappened.com, so they can find the answers to the questions they are starting to ask. And you have to be personally courageous and stand up and offer the answers when you're asked. Is the income tax legal? No, it isn't. I dare you to prove otherwise. The burden of proof in all of this is on the government. When they lied to us about Saddam's nuclear weapons, the government lost all benefit of the doubt. Whatever the government says, the burden of proof is on them. We don't have to prove the government is lying. We caught them lying. Period. End of discussion. Trust is a fool's paradise at this point. Prudence demands everything we are being told by the government. Everything we were ever told in the public schools must be re-examined. We are the most lied to people on the face of the earth, and now is the time for the truth to stand up and reclaim its supremacy in the United States of America. Now, getting on over into the Middle East, and we know how badly all of these falling, corrupted governments are desperate to start a war. Netanyahu is out there threatening more attacks on Syria, saying we have a right to bomb anybody we want for any reason we want, and we'll make up some excuse, and you will believe it, or you're a filthy anti-Semite. Meanwhile, we are getting a report that Syria's Assad has positioned missiles for a strike against Tel Aviv, and he's sending a very clear warning. If Israel bombs Syria again, they will launch against Tel Aviv. Now, of course, this is exactly what Israel and the United States wants, to justify a full-on military invasion to accomplish what their hired mercenary army has failed to accomplish in more than 2 years. And we have seen this pattern before: provoke, 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 provoke until there's a response, claim the response is an attack that requires defense, and the U.S. will leap in there to save Israel from the evil Syrians. And we know what it is. Syria is the next step on the road to war with Iran, which is what everybody wants inside the United States and Israeli governments, to force Iran's oil back on the world market only for U.S. dollars, to break up a regional political threat to Israel, to keep this little dollarification and Zionification of the globe moving forward. And it's already stumbling badly. Fox News has published a video showing Israeli special forces inside Syria. They're already inside Syria, working against Assad, working to bring him down. Syria can justly say, Israel has invaded us, along with the bombings. And apparently, Syria's government troops have seized an Israeli military vehicle inside Syria. They got it. They got proof that Israel is sending military supplies, military equipment, and soldiers across the border, across the Golan, right into Syria. So the idea that what is about to happen is somehow Syria's fault is complete nonsense. Meanwhile, Russia's out there rejecting the suggestion of a no-fly zone over Syria. It may be moot between the Patriot missiles up in Turkey and the Patriot missiles on the Israeli border. Most of Syria can effectively be made a no-fly zone with the turn of a switch, with the activation of the missiles. But Russia is out there acting like the only adult left in the room of world leaders, trying to shut this thing down before it goes any further and we get into nuclear weapons, which is inevitable. If this war by the U.S. to conquer the world's resource-rich areas goes any further, we will come into direct conflict with Russia and China. And the United States is militarily exhausted. They lack the 3 M's. They lack the money, the men, and the manufacturing to win a conventional conflict. And that means sometime between this very second and final capitulation by the United States government, they will turn those little brass keys in the missile silos, and it's going to be a bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock. Now, the Hezbollah MP Nawaf Moussaoui came out and said that obviously the situation in Syria is not turning in America's and Israel's favor. There are reports of almost 30 Hezbollah fighters being killed in clashes with the rebels. This thing could easily spin out of control, could easily spill into Lebanon, which would give Israel the excuse to invade Lebanon and get that Litani River they failed to get last time. Robert Fisk is warning that if the Syrian war goes into full-on invasion, it could go on for 2 to 3 years, become another quagmire, just like Afghanistan, just like Iraq. And that, of course, is what Russia warned they would do. If the U.S. goes into Syria and or Iran, Russia has warned the United States they will turn it into the new Vietnam and just grind this nation down bit by bit by bit. Because Russia has the resources to outlast the United States in a war of attrition. The problem is all of these people pushing for the dollarification of the globe, to bring the blessings of private central banking to all nations on earth, to enslave them in perpetuity, don't realize they're already losing. But they won't quit. They're serene in their belief that the imaginary playmate is on their side and that private central banking is the way the world is supposed to be. And that's what's really so psychotic about all of this willingness to risk incinerating the surface of planet Earth over ink and paper, to force the world into the slavery of private bankers rather than have their own government-issued currency. That's what this Clash of Civilizations is all about. It's a war between banking systems. And what is really sick about all of this is the United States is forcing on the rest of the world, through military force, The exact same kind of banking system this nation fought a revolution to be free of 230 years ago. Everybody's moving their pieces around the board. Russia, of course, is moving a major fleet of warships into the Mediterranean. It's an open issue. Will they directly intervene in the event of a Syrian attack? They might. I'm sure Putin is remembering just how close the Nazis got to Moscow in big mistake number 2. And he may be deciding that if it's going to come to open war between the United States and Russia, better it happen in Syria than inside Russia itself. Now, behind all this stuff about Benghazi Gate and all the other distractions here, the United States is preparing for a new ground assault on Libya. And they're going to sell it as we need to invade and kill the people who attacked the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. Well, nobody really knows who did that. It's just an excuse. The people of Libya have been striking back against their invaders and oppressors. They do not like their new U.S.-approved puppet regime. They certainly do not like their brand-new private central bank issuing the public currencies alone at interest. They know what it will do to their country and their children's future. So what's going on here is the U.S. is preparing a second invasion because, by golly, those people of Libya ought to know to stay conquered. We've conquered them once. They got to stay conquered. That's the way the rules that we just made up say it should be. And I don't think the American people are going to be gullible enough to look at a full-on invasion of a country we just invaded a short while ago as somehow being related to punishing the people who attacked the Benghazi consulate, especially if it turns out the people who attacked that consulate, who led that invasion, yes, other Libyans joined in, I think, but if the people who actually attacked that consulate were working for Obama's re-election campaign, the second invasion just really makes no sense at all to the American people. Congress is out there set to tighten the economic noose on Iran. They're going to put in more sanctions, more punishment, more shut them off, cut them off from gold, cut them off from selling their oil. It's a strangulation campaign. And don't forget that story that the U.S. government has actually charged people with over at Fox News. The revelation that the United States was using UN sanctions trying to provoke a North Korean response so they could go to war. And this is more of the same thing. Provoke, 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 sanction, sanction, sanction until Iran responds. Oh, the response is the attack. The war is on. They're trying to provoke a confrontation. They want war with Iran. They're trying as hard as they can to make it look like it's Iran's fault. Does anybody here really think we're going to fall for that? What, the 10th, 12th, 13th time they've tried that same scam? I don't think so. Now, following the recent P5+1 talks, where some people said progress was being made and the other side was saying, actually no, brick wall. Iran has come out with a clarification of what's really been going on, and is quite revelatory of the way these talks have been sabotaged from day one. We'll talk about that when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So Iran has basically come out and said they are willing to do whatever it takes to reassure the world that their nuclear industry is used only for peaceful purposes. And they have stated repeatedly that any time the IAEA wants to write down what their concerns and questions are, Iran will go along with that, which, by the way, is the way the IAEA is supposed to operate. They have to say ahead of time, these are the facilities we wish to inspect, these are the facilities we wish to have video surveillance on, this is where we want to go, these are the questions we have. And that's the way it operated when Mohammed al-Baradei was in charge of the place. The sticking point here is that the current head of the IAEA, Yukiya Amano, takes the attitude of the IAEA doesn't have to explain anything, they can come and go as they will at any time without any restrictions whatsoever. Now, none of the nations who've signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty are going to go along with that, because the IAEA has been caught conducting espionage by going into sensitive military areas. And so they're changing the rules to try and put more pressure on Iran. And Iran is literally bending over backward to accommodate what are some very obviously bogus allegations regarding a potential nuclear weapons program. And to date, and please keep in mind, they were saying exactly the same things about Iraq before that invasion. Oh, they've got nuclear bombs, they're going to hit us, they're going to kill us. Be afraid, be very afraid. Fool me once and all the rest of that stuff. And so basically, Iran, there has been zero evidence to date. A lot of rumor, a lot of innuendo, a lot of suggestions and allegations, and could be, might be, potentially, but no hard evidence at all of the diversion of nuclear materials away from their peaceful applications to nuclear weapons. Zero, zip, nada, has not happened. Plus, we have that cultural history to look at. It's been more than 200 years since Iran invaded another country in a war of aggression. Remember, during the Iran-Iraq war, Iraq, spurred by the United States, was the aggressor. They wanted to recapture Iran after Iran broke free from U.S. rule in 1979. Same thing we're seeing with Libya. By golly, when we conquer you, you stay conquered. That's the American way. And that's really what it's all about. The United States, and more to the point, the Federal Reserve cannot stand the idea of nations breaking free and going their own way with state-issued currencies and state-controlled central banks. That cannot be allowed to stand. Because nations that are not enslaved to a private central bank are much more prosperous than nations that are. Nations that are enslaved to private central banking cannot compete industrially and economically with nations that are free. That's why they have to be destroyed. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And to elaborate on what I was saying before the break, I want you to think back at all the American service people who've been killed and crippled in all of these wars, who are being killed and crippled even as I speak these words, and realize they are being sacrificed for no other purpose than to force private central banking on the rest of the world. That's it. That's the agenda. That's what they're dying for. That's what they're being crippled for. Ultimately, and I wrote this in the article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, they are sent to die to prop up this predatory, private-owned banking scam, to go to any nation that dares to have a state central bank, government control of the currency, and smash it, because they can't compete with it. That's what happened leading up to World War II. Germany broke free of the private central bank imposed on it by the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. They had a state-issued value-based currency. They followed the model of the public currency as a public utility, and they became immediately prosperous, an economic and industrial powerhouse against which the rest of Europe, still enslaved to private central banks, could not possibly compete. And that was the agenda behind the war. And that's what's going on here with Iran. That's why they're going back into Libya. That's why they're going into all these countries to say, you will be a slave to the private central banks, or we will kill you. It's really what it's all about. The corporate media is making a real big deal about the fact that North Korea has fired several short-range missiles over the last 2 days. Now, these are short-range missiles. They don't reach anywhere all that far from North Korea. Can't reach Japan, can't reach Okinawa, can't reach Hawaii, can't reach the mainland United States. And they're making a big deal about this. They're firing missiles. Well, you know, the U.S. is testing missiles all the time. Over in the next island over, Kauai, we have the Pacific Missile Test Range. Both there on Kauai, and now they've built a new facility on Niihau. They're always firing off test missiles. Nobody makes a big deal about that. And that's what North Korea says this is. This is just normal military training, because when you have rockets to defend your country with, your armed forces have to be trained on how to deploy them and use them. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to make a big deal about that. They're trying to get more wars going. And I don't think the United States really has an issue all that much with North Korea itself. North Korea is the back door to war with China, just as Syria is the back door to war with Iran. Because China has a value-based currency called the gold yuan that is very, very attractive to the rest of the world compared to the U.S. dollar. And that cannot be allowed to stand, so we'll gin up a war against China, and then we can stiff them on all the money we borrowed from them, and we can go in and smash them and say, you will have paper and ink currencies and a debt-based private central bank, just like the rest of us. And, of course, the problem with that is, if the money junkies succeed in this fascist banking system becoming a global standard, all of future humanity will be debt slaves forever and ever and ever. That's the model. The New World Order is a fascist economic dictatorship that will enslave all of planet Earth's billions of human beings to the bankers. And that is why we should oppose this with all of our strength, all of our will, all of our resources. Got to take a break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as the scandals continue to grow, and as the American people are now more willing to entertain the possibility that the U.S. government is not their friend, we are finding out, of course, the Department of Homeland Security routinely spied upon and disrupted the Occupy protests. Remember, I told you that bozo standing up there waving the sign around saying, bring them communism back, we've got to be commies, and all the rest of that. They were the planted actors to give the media an easy means to discredit the Occupy protests. And there were other stunts they were doing as well. This is how the government operates. And again, go back and study the history of the FBI's COINTELPRO operation. This was standard operating procedure. These are not isolated incidents. It is how the government keeps control over you. And the Department of Homeland Security, who we were told was supposed to be keeping an eye out for acts of terror, like they missed in Boston, if you believe the official story, they've been spending all their time spying on you. You, the American people. They were trying to portray Occupy as a bunch of commies and troublemakers. No, the Occupy movement was young, old, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, gay, straight, white, black, red, brown, yellow. They were me and they were you. And we are all now viewed, including those of you in the corporate media, and I know some of you are listening to this show and reading my website, you're now on that list. You're on Obama's special high-interest targets list. And all of these agencies that came up supposedly to protect us from the threat of terror are directed against us. I've been saying it for months now. The federal government is preparing to make war on the 50 states. They're using your money to spy on you. They're using your money to play dirty tricks on you. It's how they operate. Now, you remember when the Fast and Furious gun-running scandal blew up? And to me, it seemed to be a repeat of the Iran-Contra gun and drug-running scandal that was operating out of Arkansas when Bill Clinton was governor there. Guns were going down to support the Contras, and it was all being funded by cocaine that was coming back into the United States of America by the ton, and everybody involved got insanely rich off the deal. This appears to be the same thing all over again. Guns going down, drugs coming right back in, and everybody getting rich. And the Department of Justice, who never really looked into Fast and Furious all that much, apparently the U.S. Attorney for Arizona, Dennis Burke, leaked a document intending to smear John Dodson, who blew the whistle on Fast and Furious. This is how they operate. Remember when they were trying to smear the guy who broke the Pentagon Papers story? They broke into his psychologist's office trying to get files saying, oh, this guy is crazy. You don't want to listen to him. We're right back in Nixon territory here. Now, there's a more alarming story, and this was coming out of CommonSenseShow.com. The Department of Homeland Security is training the local police to enforce martial law. And they're setting up as the targets the police need to be concerned about gun owners, Second Amendment supporters, Ron Paul supporters, libertarians, constitutionalists, veterans, and Christians are being categorized as domestic terrorists. You remember way back when all this stuff cranked up, and I said we have to be very careful about allowing the government to break the Bill of Rights just by saying, oh, this is a terrorist suspect, because I warned you back then, if you let him get away with it, what constitutes a terrorist suspect is going to mutate over time. Back then, it was, somebody with an exploding vest on a bus or somebody flying an airplane into a building. Today, in the view of the Department of Homeland Security, a domestic terrorist is, well, pretty much all of us. It's casting a wide net. And again, the list that came out of the MIAC, Second Amendment supporters, gun owners, Ron Paul supporters, libertarians, constitutionalists, veterans, and Christians are all now viewed as domestic terrorists. So the Department of Homeland Security that you paid for is now aimed at you to keep you in your place, to keep you a slave to the Federal Reserve, to keep you helpless, to keep you crushed down. It is political repression. We're going to go to the phones here. Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Kyle, are you there? Hello, Kyle.
Hello.
Hey, there you are. There you are. What's on your mind today?
I was thinking about it, and really the only thing that Obama has going for him anymore is his charisma and the limited left-wing media. How far do you think that carries him, and do you honestly think that we'll see an impeachment?
I would love to see an impeachment, and I think if it were to go to impeachment, Obama would probably resign the way Nixon did rather than allow certain questions to be asked during his impeachment trial. If you remember, Richard Nixon resigned because if he'd gone into impeachment, sooner or later somebody was going to ask why, with his re-election, a study in foregone conclusions, did they need to burglarize the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate Hotel? The answer to that question would have brought down the entire government. And I think the same thing applies to Benghazi. If the Congress summons the spine to actually impeach the man, he will resign rather than allow, or rather than risk the possibility that the Benghazi consulate attack was a staged public relations election campaign hoax that got out of control, because that would bring down the entire government. At this point, I really do think the Congress is going to hem and haw and wag their finger, and they'll gladly fry some lower-level officials, but I don't think they have the moral courage to stand up to the president, or they would have done it long before now.
I don't think that they have the ability to do it, because I think a lot of them are compromised, to say the least. I think a lot of these guys are, there's enough dirt on them to build a garden, so to speak. So, I don't think it's going to happen, but I also don't think it's going to leave the public viewpoint as easily as some hope that it will.
No, the public is very, very clearly on the other side of this issue, and one of the reasons to stand up and make as much noise as you can is to let your elected representatives know that if they do not follow these scandals to the very heart, that they're not going to win re-election next election. And probably a lot of them are going to just say, I don't have to worry, we have Diebold election machines in my district, they guarantee the results. And that's, of course, another problem when you live in a nation where the elections are as fraudulent as they are. The politicians don't have to listen to you. They just have to listen to the people who own those election machines.
Yeah. And my last question is going back to my original statement. Do you really think that he's already a lame duck? I mean, do you think he has the ability to do anything productive in office at all anymore?
In terms of his domestic agenda, he may well be a lame duck. We're hearing about a move to repeal the Monsanto Protection Act. We're hearing about moves to repeal Obamacare. But in the international arena, he is still capable of starting, or rather, let me rephrase that, escalating this war into a truly global conflict and deriving political power from that. You can't challenge me. I'm trying to fight a war, and all the rest of that stuff going on.
I think that's the only option he really has left.
I'm afraid that is the only option he has left, is to really get this war going into something they're going to make movies about in the future, and he's probably already thinking, who will play me in the movie about the winning or losing of World War III?
Yeah, I don't think that he can. I don't think there's anything that he can say or do domestically that can be taken with any level of commitment or seriousness. So I think that his only option is to regain some stranglehold through a escalating conflict. And so I mean that really is in the forefront of my thoughts. So
yeah, no, I'm absolutely in agreement with you. And I know Obama's relying on his charisma, and he does have a lot of it. You know, if he were really, truly motivated to serve the American people, he could be a very effective leader, because he can speak in a way that inspires people. Now, of course, we know it's just all a fraud here. But apparently on his Saturday weekly broadcast, he was out there saying the auto industry is booming and everything is fine. Tell that to the people of Detroit. And again, it's a complete disconnect. He really seriously believes he can get on there on TV every Saturday, tell everybody that everything is okay, and we will believe it is so. I'm afraid those days are long gone.
It's the thought of the stock market is at all highs, the auto industry is booming, the housing market's coming back. It's really hard to tell that to somebody who's living on the street watching the address through a department store window TV, and he has money, and the scams is not working anymore, and his charisma is completely 100%.
Okay, your phone connection is breaking up, so we're going to let you go here, but you're absolutely right. The platitudes aren't going to work any longer. We know the government has been lying about the true scale of joblessness. We know that the stock market is being run up through market forces from all this instantly created money coming out of the Federal Reserve, and does not really reflect the health of the American economy. But Obama is basically replaying the same trick that Bill Clinton did. Run up the Dow and then wave that as your political banner, that everything is just hunky-dory in this nation. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with more phone calls after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to chime in on who the government now considers the ever creeping expansion of who they consider terrorists. You put up some numbers a week or so ago, that said that actually there, of the terrorist threats and the actual terrorism committed, that actually there were more Jewish terrorist acts committed than there were Muslim in the United States. Yes, I did.
And that's the FBI's own figures on that, and both are a minority compared to other groups, including Hispanics.
That's right. However, what I wanted to point out to you, in fact, that I'm on every one of those lists that they don't like, from Ron Paul guys, libertarian, veterans, and gun owners, and so on. But one group's conspicuously absent are the Jewish groups.
Yes.
And that's who they even though the numbers would say that perhaps they ought to be, 1% of the population and 7%, I think it was, that the FBI released of the terrorist attacks, more than the Muslims, perhaps they should be on there, but they're not. And I just wanted to point that out yet again. Mm-hmm. They never get on any of the bad lists.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I'm going to reprise that story to the top of what really happened so that people can look at that. But the actual numbers are, I'm looking at the chart right now. This is the FBI's own figures. Of all acts of actual terrorism carried out in the United States of America, Islamic extremists or somebody pretending to be an Islamic extremist account for 6%. Jewish extremists, 7%. Remember that whole situation with the JDL and Irv Rubin trying to blow up a congressman. Communists, 5%. Latino, 42%. Extreme left-wing groups, 24%. And then others count for 16%. Okay.
Well, it's interesting. The extreme left wing, they're never on there either, or very seldom are they on any.
Well, certainly not under the current administration. I mean, everything. It's basically a right wing who's who is on that list, and I'm on every one of those lists categories as well, except of course for the Christian one. But yeah, it's a wide net that catches basically all the conservative element of our society. And we've had, I'm trying to remember who it was last week, was saying that conservatives represent the Taliban of America.
Yeah, well, the same people, by the way, Mike, as you point out many times, that the IRS is now illegally auditing. So they're not doing that to left-wing groups, and it's just like a war, a political war by this guy who is more and more a cult of personality. And, I think he's a tyrant, frankly.
I think he is too, but again, and I know we're already hearing calls for impeachment and polls are coming out on the thing, but Obama is just the front man for the real problem, which is the money junkie private central bankers, and impeaching Obama and getting rid of him isn't going to significantly change anything. The only real change for a better future is to get away from private central banking worldwide and go back to the idea of the public currency as a public utility.
I absolutely agree with you, Mike. However, a real president, one with principle and courage, would have the power, since they can arrest anybody they want without charges, to completely end this right away with the central bank.
Congress can shut down the Federal Reserve anytime they want to do it. They just have to say your charter is hereby revoked. But Wall Street and the money junkies are some of the best campaign donors you can find. If you go back and you look at last year's election, at all the corporate donors to the main candidates, and right up there at the top are all those Wall Street firms that screw money out of you and then give a piece of the action to their politicians. And they donate to both sides of the election, so it doesn't matter how the people vote. Wall Street still has a lock on the government.
Well, Michael, if you can print your own money, who can't you buy?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The Federal Reserve basically was granted a charter for legalized counterfeiting.
Hey, that's it for me, Mark.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for the phone call. All righty. Let's see. The White House is still trying to come out there and say, this is all this scandals. It's irrelevant. There's no there, and it's pretty weird here. Meanwhile, we're getting another story. This is coming out of the New York Times about how Chinese hackers resume their attacks on U.S. targets. And they're trying to basically fan up this idea that America's computers, corporate computers, are under attack from China. Now, anybody who understands computer security knows that hackers will create long chains of compromised servers to hide their true origins. And so all anybody can really say is the last server in that chain is in China. But that doesn't say the Chinese are behind this. And I am still convinced that at the point where this whole Ponzi scheme central bank is going to come crashing down, the U.S. government is considering a plan to intentionally crash all the financial system computers so they can duck the blame for mismanagement and for corruption, and say it's not the result of mismanagement of the nation, it's an act of war by those dastardly Chinese. They can declare a national financial emergency, do the wealth confiscation, duck the responsibility for all that they have done to this nation. We're going to take a break for some commercials. We will be right back. And for those of you watching on Justin TV, I'm going to have to pull down the sound level for a few minutes. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I would like to basically welcome John Stadmiller, the boss of all bosses, to join us here on the microphone and talk about Republic Broadcasting's latest fundraising effort and how you can help us provide the answers to those American people who are starting to ask the important questions in the wake of Triplegate. So, John, thank you for joining us on the air, and tell us what we need to know.
First off, Michael, what I need to know from you is who just did that? Who did that song?
Oh, that was. I'll have to email that to you. I don't remember off the top of my head. It's a guy sent it to me on a CD with permission to use it.
Well, it might have been maybe even me years ago that he heard on the air. Who knows? At any rate, hey, I appreciate the few minutes here on your show. And I just wanted to ask the listeners if they'd help us participate here. Mike, a lot of people do not understand radio broadcasting. They do not understand that we have fixed costs that have got to be met every month. And, well, you're kind of familiar with this, how advertising works. And if you don't have the advertising dollars, well, then you don't pay your bills. And services they'll threaten to cut you off, and then they will. Well, that's the absolute no-no for a radio network. We run everything close to the vest. We are mindful of the economic conditions. We have been since, right around 2006, when on the network we called the recession, and that was 2 years before the start of the next depression started. And we've been very cognizant, and we've cut costs at the network, and we've been ahead of that curve for a while. We don't do a whole lot of pledge drives. I think maybe we've done maybe a half a dozen of those in the last 3 or 4 years. Well, advertising comes and advertising goes, and sometimes you get hit with advertisers. They all drop at the same time. Many of the advertisers that we have been with us for a number of years, but the new guys come in. They don't understand Patriot Radio, and they don't understand the type of network that we run. And they're in to make a killing, and if they don't see it, well, I'm sorry, I can't advertise on your network anymore. These are people, Mike, that they don't understand what we're doing. They don't understand really the shape that the country's in. And we've had a small group, as I refer to as the family of advertisers on this network for a while, but that's not covering the cost. We've lost several advertisers over the last couple of months, and we need to do a pledge drive to catch up and pay some bills. So what we decided to do, which is kind of unique, is we're doing a 1,000-ounce pledge drive, 1,000 ounces of silver. Now, one enterprising young man, well, he's about my age, so it's not that young anymore, out of Texas here says, well, why don't we do this? And he sent me a 100-ounce bar of silver, which I'm sitting here looking at right now. I wished I had a wall made of these. We wouldn't be having this conversation right now. At any rate, he says, why don't you do a pledge drive? And I said, okay. So I thought about that, and I thought, okay, let's do something. People may not be flush with cash out there right now. They may be kind of maxed out on credit cards or getting close, and we understand that. But there's a lot of listeners out there that bought rounds of silver going back, I don't know how many years. You've seen them yourself, Mike. They're the goofy 1 ounce that promoted just about everything under the sun, and people picked those up for $5 or $7 a piece. Well, they're worth about $22.99 as spot today. And we figure if we can collect about another 900 ounces of that, we can pay the bills and get caught up by the end of the month. We have to do this. I am not a rich man. I've cashed in quite a few things from time to time to keep things going. We're on a mission, and I don't want anybody to lose RBN. Mike, I don't know if you're aware or not, there's been about 4 or 5 alternative networks in the last, 3-4 months that have bit the dust.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, but looks like we're picking up their audience. But these times are hard, and years ago I used to work in advertising, and it is almost kind of this weird inverse logic that as business slows down for companies, the first area they start cutting their budget is advertising, which makes no sense. That's when you should really make that push, but it is a trend across industry. Advertising's kind of viewed as almost a luxury, and it shouldn't be. It's essential to promoting your goods and services. But we're seeing that here at RBN. We're seeing it at whatreallyhappened.com. As business continues to slow in this country, the first thing that businesses cut back on is their advertising budget, and it does affect RBN. It's affecting whatreallyhappened.com. And again, the times are very, very dire, and as John is saying, many of our fellow travelers on the road to restoration of the Republic have gone under. And it is a real threat that could happen, and right now we need you to keep that from happening to RBN.
Well, I appreciate that. When you were saying that, I was just thinking, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, what did his daddy do? He did advertising.
Yes.
And what was the complaint is he was loading some potential advertising clients into the cab in Chicago as he was shutting the door going, this is a time to advertise, you idiot, when your sales are down. At any rate, hey, I appreciate it very much, and if people will call the office to let us know that is on its way, We'll put that in as part of the pledge drive. Or if you'd like to donate directly and have done with it right away, you can go to republicbroadcasting.org. Right at the top, it's got donate. Hit that button, and it'll take you to PayPal. Or we'll accept cash, checks, or money orders. We don't care. And you can send that over to RBN 2251 Double Creek Drive. That's 2 words, Double Creek Drive, Suite 302, Round Rock, and there is actually a Round Rock in Texas. Round Rock, Texas, 78664. But folks, it's emergency. I just got a call from the satellite people going, hey, you're 2 months down. We need to hear from you. We need to hear from you, folks. We're doing everything, adding more stations to the network. As Mike says, we are picking up listeners. I don't like the way it's happening by attrition, because even, Mike, even the online guys that call themselves radio networks that really aren't. You're a radio network when you have T1s and have satellites and things of that nature. These guys couldn't even make a go at it just by doing the internet, sort of like blog talk radio. So the attrition is fast and furious, and we need to hang around, because I don't know how you feel about this network, Mike, but I think we are the best alternative media out there.
I would, of course, would agree with you immediately, and I understand. I heard that we actually picked up a new FM station in Texas just a couple of weeks ago that's carrying this show, so we're reaching more and more of an audience. But what John says is absolutely true. We're not just trying to hoax you or defraud you. This is very real. This station, this communication, this enterprise is kept alive, if not by advertising, then by you. And all the big money is on the side of those who want to sell you the Federal Reserve, want to sell you more wars, want to sell you more bad drugs. We get no corporate sponsorship from large corporations. We don't get big fat checks from shadowy non-governmental organizations. We are truly the vox populi here. We serve the people. We are supported by the people. If that breaks down, then the other side will have won. And as I've said many, many times before, they're spending millions of dollars to sell you a new world war. We're asking for a few dollars from you to help us stop it. And the only way we're going to get the big money corruption out of our society is for the little money to unite together in the common cause of restoring the Republic.
And I couldn't have said it better. You're very succinct, and I appreciate that, Michael. If somebody wants to make a donation by phone right now and give a credit card, they can call 800-724-2719. We got a couple of people manning the phones for that. But folks, seriously, we're having our 9th anniversary. We have been on air continually for coming up on 9 years. Let's be around for the 10th one. We're in the battle, and we are making a difference. So help us out. This is a win-win situation. You support us. We're supporting the effort to reinstitute what I don't call the revolution. I call it the restoration. And I thank you very much, Mr. Rivero. And by the way, you're a super kumquat, and I'll let you explain that to your listening audience.
I don't think I even want to go there, but I do want to follow up with one more comment here. Right now, we have an historical opportunity. Triplegate has opened a huge breach in the credibility of the federal government, of the IRS, of the Federal Reserve, of the Obama administration. Now is the time when we have to push as hard as we can, and we need your support to do that. So, John, anything else you want to say?
No, just there are things in the works, and we stay on air. You stay on air. There's many good things in the future, folks, and help us do what we need to do. We need your help.
All right. Thanks an awful lot, John. We're going to let you go here, and we're coming up to the top of the hour, and I'm sorry to report we still have not been able to connect with Cindy Sheehan. As I said, she's in the middle of her Tour de Peace bike ride from the West Coast to the East Coast, and she may be out of touch and out of communications because I'm sure on a bicycle it's not like you can predict exactly where and when you're going to be, but we're hoping she'll reschedule and join us a little bit later in the week. We could still be surprised. We've got 17 minutes to go, but I wanted to let you know what's going on there. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Getting back to the news here, I want to talk about the economy globally. Over in Pravda, they're reporting basically that Europe is, for all intents and purposes, falling. 9 countries in the European Union are in recession. Spain, France, Italy, Finland, Netherlands, Portugal, Cyprus, Greece, and Slovenia. The austerity policy imposed by the central bank is sinking Europe. And we have been saying all along that would be the result. And now, of course, we found out the whole model for austerity turned out to be based on a single spreadsheet with an error in it. And what is dooming Europe is the same thing dooming the United States of America. They have a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, a system which by design always produces more debt than money with which to pay that debt until the system collapses. And it's collapsing all over the world at the same time. The money junkies don't care about the rules or morality or ethics. They're there to just grab whatever wealth they can and put it in their pocket. They did it in Cyprus. They're getting ready to do it all across Europe. They're getting ready to do it in Canada. They're getting ready to do it here. And the public are starting to basically fight back. The latest poll in Great Britain shows that the population is pretty much evenly split between wanting to stay in the European Union and wanting to get the heck out. And for Britain, it's an important distinction because, remember, following World War II, when the dollar took over from the British pound as the global trade and reserve currency, Britain did nationalize the Bank of England. It is now back to being a state central bank. It's still privately owned, and it still sort of treats the currency as a money-making opportunity rather than a public utility, but it's nowhere near as abusive as the Federal Reserve, the IMF, the World Bank, and so forth. So the British want out of the European Union because then they could go back to a nation with a state central bank and the public currency as a public utility, which would certainly go a long way to reviving their empire. Over at Investment Watch blog, Jeff Gundlach is basically out there saying, we are all drowning in central banking. The world is finally waking up to the realization private central banks do not serve the public interest. They do not serve the nation. They do not serve the people. They serve only themselves. And it is a scam that basically traps nations and people in hopelessly unpayable debt in order to control them, exploit them, and loot them. Now, as more and more people come forward criticizing quantitative easing, saying it is not working, it's working wonderfully well to make the money junkies richer and let them play games in the stock market, but it's not curing the ills of the nation. And we have institutions like the BIS, the Forum of Central Banks, are just blunt, saying this is not working, it's not a solution. IMF has already come out and saying quantitative easing does not work. And so the bankers are coming out now saying, you shouldn't be paying attention to BIS, and even though IMF is technically a central bank, they have no business coming out and questioning the policies of any other central bank. So they're circling the wagons here because they're aware we, the people of planet Earth, have stood up and realized what the source of all evil in this world is going back 100 years. Private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. And we need to go back to the system this nation started with, where the public currency is a public utility, there to serve the people. Pope Francis just last week said, money must be the servant, not the master. So even he's picked up on this. Article over at Beyond Prophecy Blogspot, rigged, fleeced, duped, and scoffed at. Is every market rigged? And it's a valid question. We know the stock market is being gamed. We know the unemployment numbers are being rigged. We know the LIBOR scandal. Now, British authorities are starting to investigate if the London gold and silver fix is rigged, and it has to be. The Hong Kong Mercantile Exchange has run out of physical silver and gold. Today, they're having to settle their contracts for cash, that ink and paper stuff. And yet we're being told gold and silver prices are plummeting, they're way down. Don't you dare buy silver and gold. And meanwhile, of course, people like George Soros are grabbing every bit of it they can get their hands on. So yes, it's all rigged. The entire financial establishment exists on fraud. Because the financial establishment does not serve the nation and its people, it serves itself. We should never, ever allow private bankers to control the economy of a nation. The economy of a nation belongs to the people and the people's representatives, not private central banks. Meanwhile, here in Washington, D.C., under pressure from Wall Street lobbyists, and there are a lot of them, financial regulators have agreed to soften a rule intended to rein in credit default swaps, which is the biggest single threat facing our nation's economy. $90 trillion in credit default swaps, may even be more than that, sold against Europe's debt. And all it's going to take is one of those nations to default or leave the European Union, and the whole firestorm is going to hit. Wall Street does not have the cash reserves to make good on these credit default swaps. Where are they going to get it? They're not going to dig into their own pocket. They're going to go to the U.S. government and say, you've got to make the American people cover Wall Street's losses like they have been doing going back to the S&L bailout of the 1980s. Because they've gotten away with it so far, no reason not to try it again. I'm going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Dan is taking over in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phones when you call on in. Getting back to the economic news here. We mentioned earlier in the show how Congress is getting ready to pass another round of sanctions against Iran. They're going to keep on poking them until Iran does something that can be used as an excuse for an outright invasion. And we're seeing this article over here, and again, this is from Investment Watch blog, how the U.S. administration is trying to cut Iran's access to gold, which is kind of weird. After hearing all this nonsense from the Federal Reserve that gold is not money, you shouldn't want gold and silver. Remember that debacle we had over there in Arizona where the legislature passed a bill to recognize silver and gold as legal tender within the state of Arizona, and it was vetoed by Jan Brewer, who probably has ambitions of being promoted to Washington, D.C., and you don't get to do that by angering that private central bank and all their ink and paper nonsense. Now, another interesting article, and this is over at Blacklisted News, is asking if, in fact, the U.S. government is trying to transition from the petrodollar to petrogold. In other words, to link all of these commodities transactions through the U.S. dollar and to cut off all possible alternatives, because that's how you maintain a monopoly. You set up a scam that works, and then you work to destroy any other possible approaches to solve the problems. It's like this nonsense about marijuana legalization. You are not allowed to grow marijuana in your backyard, but there is now a medication that you can buy from the pharmaceutical companies with the exact same stuff in it that you pay a huge price for. So illegal to grow for yourself, you by golly will give your money to whatever. And so now they're trying to basically block all gold from Iran so that Iran cannot conduct any transactions without going through the U.S. dollar. You will use the U.S. dollar. We're going back to Bretton Woods. And the world is saying, no, we don't want to do that. Look at how the U.S. government, and in particular the Federal Reserve, abused Bretton Woods to make themselves rich. The world agreed to Bretton Woods on two promises. One, that the U.S. would refrain from overprinting dollars so that they could loot the rest of the world of manufactured goods and agricultural produce for mere ink and paper. And the Federal Reserve, because it's not answerable to the federal government, immediately proceeded to do exactly that. And that's what led to the gold crisis and Nixon ending gold convertibility. It's just one scam after the other, after the other, after the other. And nobody will go back and look at the root cause of all of these problems. They're just always trying to find another patch, another Band-Aid. Even if it doesn't work, they get immediate opportunity to stand there and say, look, I'm trying to solve the problem here. Vote me back into office. Please support us. And nobody in the government, except for Ron Paul, and that's why they kicked him out of the primaries, has the courage to stand up and point the finger of blame where it deserves: private central banking issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. Taking a break for station identification. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to Hour 3 of our show. And sadly, unfortunately, Cindy Sheehan is not in communication with us. And as I said before, she's on this tour de peace bike ride literally across America. She started in Santa Monica, California, following the old traditional Route 66 up to Chicago, and then from Chicago over to the East Coast, going to finish up first week in July, but of course these things are a little hard to predict. Got a lot of other people joining her for the bike ride for different sections, and obviously she's in a position right now where we cannot reach her, but we will reschedule and get her on any time that we are able to have her on our show again. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the Hong Kong Mercantile Exchange has run, it's a commodity exchange, it's run out of physical gold, physical silver. It is having, as of today, to settle all of their futures contracts for cash. No silver or gold to be given. And this is not the first time this has happened. We were getting reports a few weeks ago about metals exchanges in Europe that were not able to make good on their futures contracts and were settling for cash. So we know there's a physical shortage out there. It doesn't make sense for gold and silver prices to be going down unless it is being rigged. And the way they rig it is, even as the commodities exchanges are not able to settle their contracts for the promised commodity, silver and gold, they're selling more of those contracts. They're just pouring them onto the market because the way the London Gold and Silver Fix is calculated is they blend the price for the physical with the price for the contracts. And simply by flooding more contracts onto the market, they drive the prices down. It's another scam. It's another rigging. And it can't last forever. And as a matter of fact, looking at the financial markets today, the stock market was in an upsurge for the first half of the day, and then it started trending down. So it ended in the red, not decisively so, not enough to lose any sleep over, but enough to indicate that this glorious climb toward 16,000 may have hit a small stumbling block. Meanwhile, I'm looking at the silver spot price, and interestingly enough, in the last hour and a half, silver took off upward. So something has happened out there. And ultimately, common sense has to tell you that the price of the futures contracts ought to be traded separately from physical. But of course they don't want to do that. The money junkies are desperate to keep you in your bank savings accounts where they can haircut you at will. They're desperate to keep investors in the stock market. They don't want people dumping ink and paper, whether it's Federal Reserve notes or stock certificates, and going into silver and gold, because that would render many of these institutions insolvent if you did that. And plus, of course, we know that the central banks, people like George Soros, for all their screaming about how gold and silver isn't a safe haven, they're grabbing it as fast as they can. They're taking advantage of these low prices to grab as much as they can. It's just another scam. Now, this is a story that broke last week. I didn't get to it, and I wanted to mention it today. This came out of The Nation, and it's reporting that a survey of fast food workers in New York City revealed an 84% occurrence of what is called wage theft, where employers are finding some reason to not pay you all the wages you've earned. They short you on hours. You're a minimum wage job. They're fudging the books, and it's happened to 84% of the fast food workers. And it's just another indication of life under fascism, where the money junkies are getting insanely rich and they're just crushing you down as hard as they can into abject poverty. Because if you're poor, you're weak. That's what the real mission of the IRS is. To allow the people who support the president to get rich and to keep everybody else too poor to fight back. Too poor to donate to RBN. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and getting back to the economic news here. A very sad story out of the Daily Mail. Apparently a father who got in too deep to the payday loan companies, which are basically legalized loan sharks. And after they started harassing him over apparently a 1,600-pound debt, basically doused himself in gasoline and set himself on fire. So when you're pushing a population to the point of suicide, you've pushed them too far. And as we reported here last week, suicide among middle-aged Americans who are trapped by their financial realities has skyrocketed. We're losing more middle-aged Americans to suicide than to traffic accidents right now. And that alone tells us these things have gone on way, way too far. Now, if you're out there looking for work, and I know a lot of people are, you need to be very, very careful because there's yet another new scam out there that the U.S. government is doing absolutely nothing about. And these are scammers who will put up bogus ads for jobs and then require you to send in your resume and provide personal information which can be used to steal your identity. And again, nobody's doing anything about that. They're too busy harassing the Tea Party and the Occupy people. They're the danger and the threat. Financial fraud, well, that's American as apple pie. We don't deal anything. We don't bother with that. They're making money and they're making campaign contributions. We're not going to send the FBI after them. Meanwhile, this is coming out of blacklisted news. The European Central Bank is showing a great deal of desperation. In fact, it's described as taking on epic dimensions. They're trying to come up with some kind of a fix for the Eurozone's mounting debt without looking at the cause of that debt. That's ultimately the doom of all of these nations. They're looking as hard as they can everywhere but where the problem is, the private central banks. Remember what I said before? You could basically, a good metaphor for the European Union is a large wooden boat sitting in the water. There's 10 holes in the bottom of the boat and only 9 corks. The ratio between corks and holes being the ratio between the debt created by private central banking and the available money supply. And everything they're doing to try and, quote, save, unquote, Europe amounts to yanking a cork from one hole, shoving it into another hole in full view of the press cameras saying, I'm working on the problem. And the water still comes in and the boat is still sinking. And nobody will point at that root cause of what is causing all of this misery and unhappiness, private central banking issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. And as I said before, the good news, and I know there's very little good news in this day and age, because of globalization, all of these private central banks are going to come crashing down at the same time. And it will be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for nations to restart themselves with a state-controlled central bank, a state-controlled economy, and a public currency that is truly a public utility. And we need to get to that. And the money junkies, the private central bankers, are going to fight tooth and nail. We know these are people without any moral conscience. They're psychotic. If you go back and you look at all wars are bankers' wars, these private central bankers have gladly sent hundreds of millions of human beings to death and disfigurement to keep their little scam going across the entire world. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I'm still getting my website fixed. But anyway, I noticed on TV they got these car title loans just going up in our faces, like get cash for your title and all that stuff. And it's like I tell people, don't go near that. Stay away from it. It's just as bad as payday loans.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's predatory vulture capitalism, taking advantage of the misery of the people who have been absolutely destroyed by private central banking. They see it as just another money-making opportunity. We know that a lot of these debt reconciliation businesses turn out to be frauds. A lot of these IRS will get you out of trouble things. They turn out to be huge frauds. And it's open season on the American people. The U.S. federal government has declared open season on your wallet, and there's no bag limit.
But you know the thing is about this economy, talking about people committed suicide. I know a lot of people are frustrated and depressed because they think it's all their fault and that it's a personal failure why they're out of work and they're nearly broke. I'm like, no, it's not your fault. It's the economy, but you have to. And I just tell them, I said, you know, Mike, how I make a living, excuse me, I use all the skills I learned in wood shop in junior high school and high school.
Mm-hmm.
Making little spice racks, bird houses, and all that stuff. And I do pretty well. I just said, if you got marketable skills, put them to work for you. You know, it's a good stress reliever. You ain't got a boss looking over your shoulder, and you really put out a decent product for others to buy.
Yeah, and we all need to start buying locally, and we need to start paying cash here. The reason the government is actually opposed to us trying to save ourselves with these kind of approaches is they can't track them, they can't tax them. They want everything to go through that central bank. There's a new push to end all cash in society and make sure that everything you do has to go through a little card so that they know where the money is and they can take their little piece of the action, and they can absolutely guarantee that you can't go to your neighbors and try and buy some tomatoes from their garden, and they can't come over to your garden and buy some ears of corn. You will go through the supermarket. You will use money to live your life. And again, we're back to what Pope Francis was saying. Money should be the servant of the people, not its master. And we do live in a society right now where that little piece of ink and paper has become master to us all. Your slave chains are made out of those Federal Reserve notes.
Another thing, you always talked about like the broken window economy.
The broken window analogy, yeah.
Well, I thought that with that internet security company. I don't want to mention the name on air right yet because I'm not sure. I'm short of just that close of accusing them. It's more like they sold me a package of hardening my website. Well, they said they did it. Well, it didn't really harden the website because once I got it back, I started having malware problems and all those problems you started telling me. Well, every time they say, well, you have to pay $200 to get our deep cleaning, I would clean the website, and all of a sudden this malware would pop in again. And it's like, and they said, well, you got to buy our deep cleaning, sir. And I'm starting to believe they put it there, hoping I would buy their service.
Could very well be. In the early days of computer hacking, where it was just malicious before identity theft became a huge problem, I often wondered if these hackers releasing these new viruses were working for the computer security companies. It was the virtual version of the old mafia protection game. You got to buy protection for your computer or something bad going to happen. And again, the fallacy of the broken window analogy is that, yes, if you break a window, you will force the person to buy new glass and a new frame and the rest of it, but it's a very backward-looking way of motivating the economy. And we've fallen into it with planned obsolescence and all these other issues where the American people are working just as hard as they possibly can just to stay where they are. Not move forward, not build for the future, not build a better world, but they're constantly having to replace things. I'm having to replace another household appliance this afternoon that I've only had for a couple of years, and it died. And no, unless you're a money junkie living off the labor of the American people, you can't build a better future if every bit of your effort is diverted into simply staying where you are.
Exactly. Well, Mike, I'm thinking about putting some of my retro appliances on eBay. They're like 20, 30 years old. They're still working.
I'll probably buy some. I mean, I'm moving away from all that modern high-tech stuff. I got sick of all these automated coffee machines. You'd set up the night before and the coffee would be ready when you'd get up, and then that little flimsy basket would wear out and nobody had the replacement, but they were ready to sell you a new $80, $90 automatic Wizzo coffee thing, and I threw that all away, and I've gone to a French coffee press, and it works and shows no signs of wearing out, and I am very, very happy with that.
Well, I got an old percolator if you want. It still works. Well, thank you, Mike.
All right, you got it here, and we're going to switch over to Heretic in Colorado. Aloha, Heretic. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Hi. Hey, I was just listening to what that guy said. Speaking of that, I bought a washing machine from Salvation Army, and it's the kind that goes in a laundromat. So every time I wash my clothes, I get paid $1.
Well, somebody once said that, the whole idea of the service economy was the idea that you could make a nation prosperous doing each other's laundry for a fee, and it really isn't. Yeah. But, we were losing our manufacturing back in the 1980s and 1990s, and people started saying, if we're not making any products, how are we going to run the economy? And the government said, no, we'll just have a service-based economy and everybody's going to be fine. All that did was create new taxation opportunities for the government itself, but it didn't correct the underlying economic problems with this nation.
Yeah, I remember when they announced it, and I was skeptical at the time, but I didn't quite understand why as much as I do now. But I was wondering, this may or may not have anything to do with it, but I noticed that the Hong Kong Gold Exchange comics there ran out of physical, and they've admitted it, maybe because the people in Hong Kong are a little smarter than the people here because they're demanding physical.
Well, yeah, definitely. Well, actually, that's not entirely accurate because what the Hong Kong Mercantile Exchange was selling were paper futures contracts, commodities contracts, saying, if you give me so much money now, in 6 months I will deliver X amount of gold. And now it's 6 months on, and they can't make good on the contracts because everybody's overselling these contracts to keep the price of silver and gold depressed. And now the contracts are coming due, and they don't know where to get it. And now they're just, we'll settle for the current cash value of the gold, which is a deal for them because they've succeeded in depressing the price of silver and gold. So they're making money, just shuffling the papers. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The phone lines are loading up. We're going to take some phone calls here, starting with Scott in Virginia Beach. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Listen, I just heard you talking about the broken window analogy, and every once in a while I hear you bring it up on the show, but you don't go into detail about it. I always assumed you were talking about Microsoft and Windows 7.
No, not exactly. For the benefit of our listeners who are not sure what I'm talking about, the idea was, in fact, this was even a part of the storyline in the movie The Fifth Element, which if you've not seen it, it's a fun movie. You've got to see that one. The idea being that if somebody throws a rock through your window, it's actually good for the economy because now you will go out and you will spend money to buy a new piece of glass and hire somebody to put it back in the window frame and clean up the broken glass, and therefore it stimulates the economy. But it's a false analogy because you're spending money to replace that window that you might have spent hiring a new worker or buying a new piece of equipment to make your company more productive. But it's often cited as a reason to justify planned obsolescence, to basically force companies and individuals to constantly buy the same thing over and over and over again because it's good for the economy. The reason the U.S. government does not do anything about computer crime is because it forces us to go out and buy computer security software, and that, of course, stimulates the economy. But it's a very short-sighted view of keeping the economy going. Nobody's thinking long-term. Nobody has the long view. That, of course, is supposed to be the function of the federal government, to have that long view, what is best for the nation over the long term. But we know 100 years ago they gave up thinking about the long view, or they would have never voted the Federal Reserve Act into existence.
Well, Mike, why don't we go ahead and have everybody go along with the planned obsolescence, including the Federal Reserve, and also planned obsolescence?
How would you implement that? I'm not sure what you're getting at.
Well, I mean by ending the Federal Reserve.
Oh, we definitely have to do that.
And then also having planned obsolescence for different state governments and maybe certain federal governments, to renew itself.
Well, I think all politicians ought to be limited to 2 terms, one in office and one in prison.
Well, I'll tell you a quick story about planned obsolescence, and this really burns me. I just found out about 2 weeks ago how to put more ink into my ink cartridges for my ink printer.
Yes.
And I urge everybody just to go on YouTube. You can pull it up on any video. People put it out there for free on how to do it. It costs less than $1 to refill most ink cartridges, no matter what the brand name is. And I remember when I was out of work 3 years ago, I had to make a decision between food and buying an ink cartridge because I was looking for work and I had to send out applications. I was applying for a police officer position in several cities around the state. And I needed my printer. And I had to spend $40 on this cartridge. And just recently I found out that it's only $1 worth of ink in that. And it's easily refillable. You don't even have to throw away the cartridge for most printers.
Oh, those things cost more than drugs. They cost more than drugs. And a lot of the companies that, they'll sell you the printer at close to cost because they know they're going to make the money on those ink cartridges. And some companies like Hewlett-Packard now have a timeout in the cartridge so that you can't refill them. In fact, I went through a really angering situation not too long ago where I had stockpiled a whole bunch of ink cartridges just to have on hand. And as I got to the end of that stockpile, they started saying, this ink cartridge has expired. And even though it was a full cartridge just out of the wrapper from the store, I hadn't tried to refill it, the printer refused to use it because it was too old on the calendar. And so, yeah, it's just another rip-off situation. And
they'd come out with a workaround around that where they have these things called chip resetters.
Oh, okay.
They're really cheap. And then they also, the best bet, because I'm self-employed now, I couldn't find a job, so I ended up making my own job. And I found a fantastic way, and by the way, my business has nothing to do with printers, okay? But I use my printer a lot to send invoices out, and I was using a ton of ink. And even at $1 a piece for ink, I was messing with the cartridges quite a bit, refilling them. But they have things online. You can just go online anywhere, where they have these high-capacity ink stations that you can hook up to your cartridges. That way you don't even have to take your cartridge out. And they're cheap. I just bought one for like $15.
Yeah.
And it's all plastic. There's nothing complicated about it, and it's very easy to set up. Just go on YouTube, and they can show you how to do it. And I think they make them for all different types of printers. So anybody who's self-employed, who's struggling right now, and printer costs are big when you're doing an online business, which is what I do. Just go on YouTube. I'm not recommending any brand because just go on and you find what works for your printer, and you'll find yourself saving a ton of money and not being ripped off by these printer companies.
Yeah, and I remember when I was a kid long time ago, and you had a typewriter, any company could make replacement ribbons, and so competition kept the prices down. But all these new printers, they all have proprietary ink cartridges, and you may only buy ink from the original printer manufacturer. And again, it's another scam and a money-making opportunity. I know a complete reset of cartridges on my printer is like $65 now, and for $5 worth of ink. It's just another way of ripping off America. Got to take a break for commercials. And let's see. Apparently, a caller off-air said that you can use expired ink cartridges if you reset your Windows global clock. Well, that's not really practical because a lot of other things will go wrong when you do that. Your mailbox won't work correctly, automated schedule. That's not really a good solution at all. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Hey, I worked for a bank for 3 years, and I knew the bank president because of my paper route that I had growing up. His parents lived there. Anyway, over the weekend I heard, I think it was a Jack Bauer rebroadcast maybe, and the people were talking about how to take a car truck out of the statutory commercial system so that you no longer are compelled under the statutes to buy mandatory insurance and all that, and also it negates the extortion racketeering citation process. And so maybe in the future it would be possible to some Corey Ibe or something like that had called in. I didn't get the website down. But I know this is true. I know it's a fact. I just need the specifics, and I'm going to proceed.
I can give you the specifics on that. What he's talking about is what's called a farm license plate, where you basically have a car or truck that you promise you will not actually use on the public road and highway system. It's only going to be used on dirt roads on your own farm property, and they do get special treatment, but it's certainly not applicable to ordinary motor vehicle drivers around the country. And of course, if people started finding a loophole to allow themselves to be free of some of these regulations and fees and taxes, the government will quickly move to close it, because right now law supports the money junkies, not the people, and that is not likely to change anytime soon.
Okay, but on the loan process, Mike?
Yep.
I've got a report from a retired law school professor regarding that whole thing, and whenever the promissory note is autographed, with the authorized signature of the contracting borrower, so-called. The promissory note is deposited into a new account in that contracting borrower's name, and then a bank draft is issued against that, and then the bank gets endowed with Federal Reserve notes within 24 hours.
Yes.
So, in reality, the funding source is actually the contracting borrower. She creates the money that funds the loan.
The borrower is the only item of actual value in that whole transaction. Their promise of labor is the only item of value. Everything else is just a symbol.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is the bank is extorting principal and interest because they haven't loaned anything. They have not loaned anything from their end because the contracting borrowing party, presumed valid, doesn't know that their promissory note that they create with their autograph as an authorized signature, which is deposited in a new account in their name, is actually the funding source.
That's right.
The loan.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So,
actually, this is covered. This is covered in very good detail in this documentary that was made a while back called "Money as Debt," where it basically said the money that you are given in your loan does not come into existence until you have pledged your labor. And the bank simply takes your labor, your promise of labor, monetizes it, and then gives it back to you along with an interest obligation. And it's a complete fraud and a complete scam. And the only reason it works is people are brainwashed into believing this is the way the economy is supposed to work.
You know what, Mike? As I have endeavored to explain this to my fellow countrymen in my neighborhood where I live all my life, they just get all glassy-eyed, man. They think I'm a Looney Tune from the dark side of the moon. And they tell me, well, if you don't like it here, move to Russia. I says, well, we're living the Communist Manifesto as we speak, aren't we?
On that, I disagree with you. We're not living the Communist Manifesto. We have gone fascist. We are in a fascist economy that takes the wealth from the working people whose labor creates that wealth and transfers it to the financial money junkies. That's fascism. And we need to be very clear on that because I know a lot of people are screaming, oh, Obama's a communist, Obama's a communist. No, he isn't. He's a fascist dictator where the country is run for the benefit of the money junkies. Now, I'm an okay, Fred, I'm going to let you go here because I need to make a point without being interrupted here. You need to understand, I'm a diehard capitalist. I think capitalism can work, but only so long as the government is working on the side of the people. And capitalism is kept as a private enterprise without access to civil government power. That's the ideal model. That's the model that did make America great. Okay? But when you have the government working with the bankers to loot the people, that is no longer capitalism, that is fascism. And that is really where we are right now, robbing the poor to give to the rich. We are not a communist country, and we're certainly not a capitalist country any longer. We have devolved into outright economic fascism, and oddly enough, Vladimir Lenin predicted that when Western capitalism failed, it would have to become fascistic merely to survive, to preserve the wealth and privilege of the money junkies. And he was absolutely, absolutely right. We're going to go to Chuck in Texas. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I just wanted to make a point about the Hong Kong exchange that is closing. I had to agree with the caller who called in earlier and said the Chinese are smarter than that, or the Asians are. It never did get off the ground. They've only got to pay off about 200 contracts because they never did buy into it. It never got off the ground.
Oh, that's a good thing to hear. But again, it shows there is a trend of these commodities brokers who are trading in silver and gold issuing contracts they cannot make good at. And it puts the lie to the idea that gold and silver aren't in demand. They certainly, I mean, the Chinese government was encouraging their people to buy silver and gold, physical. And
they have been several years.
Yeah, they have been. And same thing with India. The Indian people are encouraged to buy physical silver and gold, even if it's just as jewelry. And, of course, our government is saying, you don't want that smelly, messy, old silver, tarnishy gold just sits there and does nothing. You want to buy the stock market, and you want to buy in the futures contracts, and you want to buy derivatives and all the rest of that stuff.
Absolutely. Just a real quick comment on the silver drive.
Yes.
Come on, guys. You know, let's pony up to the bar so we can keep Mike telling us what's going on, because I just love your show, Mike.
Oh, well, thank you very much. You got it. And listen, if you don't have a silver round or a silver bar and you want to donate, I just want to hit the point. There is no such thing as too small a donation. If everybody listening to this show got onto the RBN site to the donate button and donated just $5, everybody listening to this show did $5 to RBN, John Stadmiller would just be tap dancing on the desks. And that is worth the $5 to see right there. So, anyway, back to the phones. Nathan in California. Aloha, Nathan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. And I promise I'll send you $5.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, okay. I called to talk about something else, but I wanted to kind of defend your caller that was just talking about Russia.
Yes.
Give him 10% credit. 40 years ago, I mean, you know, Russia had a lousy government.
Yes.
They had a lousy economy.
Yes.
Excuse me, there's a truck in front of the house here.
Okay.
They had a lousy government, a lousy economy, a huge military that they couldn't afford, and they were in a situation where they had the KGB everywhere.
Yes.
You know? So if you say, well, aren't we kind of like that today? You know? Homeland Security,
well,
FBI.
No, we're not talking about the oppressive government. He was saying that we have gone into communism in this country, and I absolutely disagree.
I agree.
We've gone into fascism. But again, look at Italy under Mussolini. Same thing. Bad government, poverty for the people, but that was a fascist society. So the problem isn't communism or fascism so much as it is, tyranny that is oppressing the people for whatever reason. And even communism under the Soviet Union wasn't really all that communistic. It really did create the wealthiest ruling class in all of history, and it did actually make a mockery of Marx's writings on the subject. Because, and again, it was just advertising to the people. Things are hard, but really we're sharing equally with everybody, and of course that was not true. The politically connected became extraordinarily wealthy in the former Soviet Union, and the ordinary people were just crushed down into the dirt. Doesn't matter if it's communism or fascism, that is going to be the end result for the ordinary people.
Well, I do agree with you that we are in a fascist state, and very well said. I just wanted, the real reason for my call, and I'll do this very quickly, I know you're at the end of the show, I wanted to thank one of the members of your audience about 10 days ago. This person called in and mentioned Extortion 17 press conference.
Yes.
And that was about the Navy SEALs that were shot down in Afghanistan about 90 days after the supposed bin Laden raid. And I went to YouTube and watched that, and I just wanted to thank him. I enjoyed that press conference very, very much. I watched the whole 3 hours and 10 minutes. You have a wonderful audience. And I just wanted to mention that at about 1 hour and 18 minutes, we had speakers, retired generals there, Paul Vallely, we had Admiral Ace Lyons, General McCurney, Jerry Boykin. They all started at about 1 hour and 18 minutes. And just to quote Admiral McCurney, and I'll let you go, he was talking about Benghazi, and he said, complicity not to go rescue our people. And he says, 2 chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have been complicit, 2 CIA directors complicit, 2 secretaries of state complicit, and 2 secretaries of defense complicit. Never in the history of this republic have we seen this corruption and complicity, and as Admiral Lyons said, this dereliction of duty. And the last sentence, he says, you are violating the Constitution of the United States, and we expect more out of you. And I'm just like, wow, we need more people like these retired admirals.
Well, that's why they're retired. They were willing to speak out and say these things. Just like we have this other retired 4-star admiral who was coming out and saying exactly the same thing I am. The attack on the consulate at Benghazi was a staged event to make Obama look good for his reelection, and it got out of control, and his PR stunt turned into an epic fail. Nathan, going to let you go here. We're going to take one more phone call, and then I got some stories we got to get to before the top of the show. BJ in Arizona. Aloha, Beej. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Real quick. What's going to happen when they want to bring in the cashless society to their huge drug trade?
Well, I'm sure that they'll figure out some way around that, probably in that you will use your cash card to buy something of value that you trade to the street dealer, and they'll resell. I'm not really sure. You're absolutely right. The fact that our own government is so complicit in the drug trade is why the totally cashless society can never come about. What they may do, and we're already seeing this in Europe, is transactions above a certain level may not be paid in cash, so that they can keep track of the big purchases, and then if you're just buying your drugs for, I don't know what the street price of drugs is right now, I'm going to say 20, 30, 40 bucks for whatever, are below the limit, so they can keep that cash flow going. Okay?
Yeah. The world needs to get together and have our own alternative currency so that when they come out with whatever Ponzi scheme next, we say, no thanks, we already got it taken care of, go away.
Well, that's when they'll declare war on us. That's what happened in Libya. Libya got rid of their private central bank. They set up a state central bank and the gold dinar, and that's why they got invaded and Gaddafi killed. And now the Libyan people are fighting back.
Can't fight the whole world. You can't fight the whole world at once.
Well, like I said, right now we've got this wonderful opportunity because of globalism. The entire private central bank scam may collapse at the same time, and we have to be ready to move very quickly to make sure they don't just set up a new one. Because they're going to try. They'll immediately come back and say, oh, we'll have a new private central bank, and everything's going to be really great. And we need to be ready to take anybody who dares suggest a new private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan and interest is going to have to be hanged, drawn, quartered, burned, and the ashes peed on by a rabid dog.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right, we're going to let you go here. Now, earlier in the show, we were talking about how anger is very clearly building against the Department of Justice for this wide surveillance net over the corporate and, we presume, independent media. Anger is building against the Internal Revenue Service for its abuse of dissident groups, not just the Tea Party, not just Occupy, groups that were trying to point out the lies in the global warming situation were targeted. And so there's a lot of anger building there, and there's going to be huge protests that are cranking up. And already we're seeing an attempt to diffuse and hijack and misdirect the people's anger. I saw this article coming in basically saying, those fusion centers, ought to be directing our anger against the fusion centers, not the IRS and not the Federal Reserve. And so, again, they're trying to distract and sort of muddy the waters. And we're going to see a huge amount of propaganda about how, oh, really, this group over here is really far more evil than the Federal Reserve and the IRS, and you ought to go protest over there against them. Well, the fusion centers are an evil, and they are unconstitutional, but they are merely the tool. And like I said at the top of the show, think of Blackbeard and his pirate crew. Blackbeard changed his crew time and time again. But as long as Blackbeard himself was allowed to continue, so did the plundering of the people. The fusion centers, the Internal Revenue Service, the Department of Justice, the FBI, they are merely the scurvy crew of scallywags. Blackbeard is that Federal Reserve Bank, and as long as that is allowed to remain unmolested, nothing will change in this country for the American people. The looting and plundering will go on. There'll just be a different guy behind that eye patch and underneath that pirate hat. It's like the old question, where are your buccaneers? They're under my bucking hat. We're going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Got a couple of stories before we finish up the program. Over the weekend, the federal government technically ran out of money. It hit its current debt ceiling. The Treasury Department simply suspended the ceiling, and they borrowed another $300 billion in new debt. It's out of control. It's completely out of control. Moody's is now saying, unless there is some kind of a budget deal, which means taking more away from you to give to the money junkies, Moody's will downgrade the U.S. government's credit rating. They can't keep this up much longer. It's going to get really, really ugly out there. By the way, a little footnote for the Department of Homeland Security. When they're not out there harassing the Occupy movement and the Tea Party, apparently a major part of their mission is raiding mall kiosks that are selling counterfeit goods. Now, what they mean by counterfeit is these products are just as good as the name brands. They just don't have the name brand on there, or they're not supposed to. And it shows how far down the road we've gone when people are buying things so they can put that brand on their body as a status symbol without caring whether the underlying product is good or not. They're buying the label. They're buying the status symbol. And you should avoid that. You should never go for the name brand. You should make all your purchases, whether it's appliance or cosmetic or whatever, anything, on the quality of the product itself. Nobody's really going to think of you as a better human being if you have the swoosh on your shoe or not. It's nonsense. And now the Department of Homeland Security is spending your money to protect the corporate interests of the designer, whatever they're designing this week. All right, almost to the top of the show, and I want to go back and recap. Triplegate, Benghazi, DOJ, IRS, has opened a huge breach in the credibility of the federal government as a whole. Now is the time we should all push as hard as we can to restore the republic, to undo much of the damage that has been done to this country by the money junkies. Now is the time to go out there and join a Tea Party protest or an Occupy protest. Now is the time to donate anything you can to Republic Broadcasting to keep us going to get the truth out there. Now's the time for you to stand up in the middle of your school classroom or your church or your place of employment or your family gathering and say, look, this has gone on long enough. This country has gone down a bad path, and it is up to we to turn it around. Superman is not coming to save us from the evil ones. Iron Man is not coming to make the world better. There are no heroes out there other than the one that looks back at you every morning from that mirror. If there was ever a time for 300 million American people to stand up at the same time and say, no more, we will not be the wallets of last resort for Wall Street and Washington, D.C.'s crimes and corruptions, today is the day. So what are you going to do to make this a better nation for our children? And on that thought, have a good evening. We're going to head on out of here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay skeptical, get angry. Now's the time to get angry, and aloha, America.